Hello and welcome to our latest streaming event. My name is Rob Newton and I'm Marketing Manager here at Visual Impact. And today we are covering camera selection in the world of live production with Neil Thompson, who's a Sony independent certified expert and all-round camera guru. Before we get started, I just want to go through some housekeeping. Please ask lots of questions as we go through the presentation. It makes it more engaging, and obviously you're going to get more value for money in terms of getting those questions answered by someone who's got years of experience in this area. We're also recording it, so we will send you a link. So if you or family and friends or anyone you know wants to re-listen to it, then you'll be able to do so. Also, if you want to listen to previous webinars, podcasts, or how-to videos, check out our website at visuals.co.uk. While we're waiting for everyone to sign in and get ready, I just want to do a quick poll, really. It's just to guess it is whether it's time to face events rather than just doing offline streaming events. So I think some people have already gone back to doing those events. So if you could use your chat window and just type in yes or Y if you're happy to come into our office in Teddington, or no if you feel it's a bit too early re-COVID. Quite understand if that's the case, but it'd be nice just to have your input so we can maybe do some face-to-face stuff and you'll be able to come in and use the equipment rather than it just being over the internet. So if you don't like to just do your chat now, whether you, as I say, you'd be in the chat window, do you want to come into the office or do you not? I'm getting a few coming in saying they were quite happy to come in. Yes, you've obviously got someone else is just saying that it's easier to attend the webinar. You haven't got to spend the time traveling, which is very true. But obviously you miss quite a lot in not being able to look at the real pictures from the camera or feeling how heavy it is, whether it's ergonomically correct in terms of you using the camera. So there's some quite good pluses, but as I say, I totally understand if it's a bit too early. And I don't know if any of you are going to BRC, but they're obviously going to have their big event at the beginning of April. So I might see some of you there. Okay, I think if everyone's done their voting, yes, at BRC, excellent. Okay, I think we'll stop there and we'll hand over to Neil for the presentation. Thanks very much so far.
Thank you, Rob. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Neil Thompson. Full disclosure, I used to work with Robert back in the day at Sony, and I was just thinking about it, and it might be 30 years ago. Sorry, Rob, I don't mean to indicate that you're extremely old, but just like a fine wine, Rob, you just get better with every year. That's what I keep telling myself about me anyway. So, yeah, so 30 years ago, live production wasn't really all that different. It's interesting. When I joined Sony, there was a camera called the BVP-70 around, which was a 3-chip CCD camera that wouldn't look unfamiliar to an outside broadcast setup today, really. All right, it didn't do Ultra HD or anything or high dynamic range, but a 3-chip 2/3 inch camera with lenses that would look extremely familiar to a current full high spec OB company right now. And in fact, even the lenses would transfer straight onto the current existing cameras. So things haven't changed dramatically in all that time, but they are changing. And our mission today is to have a look at how the world is changing and how people want to use slightly different flavors of cameras in current live and OB sort of production. And I have a newfound respect for live production because of this pandemic business. I've done a lot of these sort of live streaming events, And back in the day, I was a camera engineer, and to be honest, looking after Sony cameras wasn't too much of a challenge really, because they mostly worked. You put them up, press the button, a green light came on, and you could go and have a cup of tea. Now I'm faced with all sorts of networking connections, vision mixing, doing my own lighting, audio, zoom, and all the rest. And I have a newfound respect for live production people. And if there's any OB or studio guarantee engineers out there, well, credit to you, because every time you set up one of these settings, something goes wrong. I've lost one of the inputs on my little vision mixer today, so I'll have to do a bit of replugging when we get that far. But that's not too much to worry about, I don't think, and we'll get by. So, yes, 30 years ago, it was a simpler world, but we've moved on since then, and I'm going to go through some sort of PowerPoint slides, but I've also got some equipment here. If I show you briefly what I've got me, which is fairly important, I like to think. Of course, I've got an FX9 camera with me, and we'll show how we can integrate the FX9 camera into a live production workflow. For old time's sake, I've got an HDC 3500 there. I say for old time's sake, this is a brand new, top of the line, shiny, traditional OB sort of a style camera. And I think I've got some control panels that will enable me to control that camera. And delivering these pictures to you at the moment is a BRC-X1000 PTZ camera, and we'll have a bit of a chat about how PTZ cameras fit into the new world that we're facing as well. So in the meantime, back to me, as they used to say on Floyd on Food, if you remember that far back, and I'll go through a bit of PowerPointy stuff, because no presentation from a Sony kind of person is complete without 400 slides of PowerPoint. So let's get started. So live event cameras under the spotlight. As I say, things have changed, but not that much actually. If we go back a long time, we'd recognize this sort of camera system, a 2/3 inch with a big box lens on for sport, or with a 20 times or a 22 times or an 18 times zoom on for handheld or lightweight production sort of thing. And these sort of cameras still form the backbone of all live production, really. Pretty much everything you see in terms of sport and athletics and Strictly Come Dancing and shiny floor shows like that, and pretty much everything going out live from a studio environment as well as an OB environment depends on these sort of cameras. However, we're kind of moving to a world now where it's opening up a bit more, and cameras like the PTZ style of cameras and large sensor cameras like the FX9 are moving in on that territory and gaining a foothold. But we want to explore today how you integrate these different kind of cameras into a workflow that's been working, as I say, for many years, very successfully. And I wouldn't say there's some kind of resentment from 2/3 inch cameras that's pushing these cameras back again, but they need to sort of prove their worth and integrate into a very well established and efficient way of working. Excuse me. So 2/3 inch format cameras have been the standard for many years, but why is that? It kind of comes from the days of tube cameras. When you physically built a tubular device that was your cathode ray tube, it would have a typical diameter of 2/3 inch, and the actual image sensor size would be somewhat less than that. So we always say 2/3 inch cameras, but the actual size of your CMOS or CCD sensor or whatever is somewhat less than 2/3 inch diagonally across. But that's why we've come from that sort of size of sensor, and by happy coincidence, it was a good choice. For reasons of manufacturing, you've got to have a sensor that's reasonably big to fit all the pixels on. Although we keep moving the goalposts and going from standard def to high def to UHD, and I believe there may be some 8K nonsense lurking around the corner, which too much already. But we're already always trying to squeeze more pixels onto the image sensor. So the bigger the image sensor, the better from that point of view. But then we've got to put a lens on the front of the camera that projects an image circle that fills up the sensor. And of course, the bigger the sensor size, the bigger the piece of glass you have to put on the front end of the camera. So we don't want it to be too big because we can't afford to make the glass, because it costs a lot of money to make a big lens. And the bigger your image sensor, the less zoom range you're going to have, which, as we'll see as we go along this afternoon, is going to be a key point in what we're talking about. So 2/3 inch has always been a pretty perfect size, really. So why would you want to change that? Well, people are always looking for a different look to their pictures. Maybe use a different palette of lenses. And of course, the pandemic has played its part here. People want to do remote production. And for remote production, you may typically want to reduce the number of human beings on location in contact with each other and move towards a PTZ, a pan tilt zoom kind of camera operation. So we've got different things pulling in different directions here. Typically, if we want a different look to the pictures, we would want a larger image sensor. And that will give us a smaller depth of field. And this is something that everybody's always looking for. We'll come back to that a bit later. And also, if you change the image sensor size, you would need different types of lenses. So rather than using the PL, the 2/3 inch B4 mount lenses that we're used to, we might move to B4, sorry, to PL mount lenses, where there's a whole different range of glass that you can use. That gives a different look to the pictures. And also, in terms of PTZs for remote production, we'd kind of want to go the opposite way. We'd want to use smaller image sensors because the PTZ cameras typically have built-in zoom lenses, and the bigger the zoom range you want, the smaller your image sensor needs to be. So we've got sort of conflicting desires here. So we also have some other challenges as well that we need to think about, as well as sensor size. Because if we change the sensor size, we change the lens focal length range. And whereas traditionally we might be used to putting a 107 times zoom box lens on a camera at the back of the stadium, and being able to count the pimples on the forehead of the star artiste on the stage 500 meters away, you can't really do that with a large format sensor. If we were to try and build a 100 times zoom lens and put it on a PL mount for a full frame camera like the FX9, things would get very sticky very quickly. The lens would be about the size of a Ford Transit van, I would think, something of that order, and it would cost about the same money as the space shuttle. It would just be ridiculous and unfeasible. So we have to accept that there may be some compromises to be made if we go bigger with our sensor. And at the same time, we have this infrastructure that we're built that is kind of comes with the traditional 2/3 inch B4 mount technology that we have already. And we're very used to being able to control all the cameras, have very good connectivity, and being able to match the cameras very easily. And if we're going to try and fit the FX9 or the Venice camera or some PTZ cameras into that kind of world, we need to do our best to be able to tick the boxes for control, connectivity and matching. And we'll come to each of these topics one by one as we go through this afternoon. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions, chuck them into the chat box. And if I could remind Rob to, if he sees any questions that I've obviously missed, just shout at me and remind me that someone's put a question up there. So we do have some challenges then ahead of us. If we look at some examples of the kind of cameras that we're looking at today, I'm going to use as examples the HTC 3500 that I just showed you before. There's also another member of the family called the HXC FB80, which I guess we're talking about mostly today low to medium cost live production scenarios. And if you still need 2/3 inch cameras to go into your mix, then the FB80 is a good starting point. And I'll just do a bit of a summary about that later on. And the BRC-X1000, I've missed the X off there, sorry. And the BRC-X1000 is a little bit of an oddity in terms of PTZ cameras. Because as I mentioned before, typically when we move to PTZ, we expect the image sensor to get smaller. And we're used to PTZ cameras having 1/3 inch or even 1/4 inch sensors, very small image sensors mostly derived from consumer camcorders, to be honest. And you basically get a consumer camcorder out of the Sony range or whatever, strip the image sensor module out of it and repackage it in a PTZ camera. Although you may notice that Sony have had for some considerable time a range of 1-inch sensor cameras in their camcorder range. And this is the same basic principle. They've taken that image processing and image sensor technology from a camcorder and put it into a PTZ camera. But it's a little bit unusual putting a larger sensor, a 1-inch sensor, inside this kind of camera, and it gives you a particularly good image quality. I think people sometimes associate PTZ cameras with going a bit downhill and having to sacrifice image quality. That isn't necessarily always the case. The BRC-X1000 and indeed the X400 sorry, not the X400. The X1000 uses a 1-inch sensor that's a particularly good image sensor. Also a derivative it used in stills cameras as well. And of course the FX9, which I guess many of you will already be familiar with, which we'll cover in some depth a little later on, and have a look at version 3 of the software that allows a lot more integration into this live production world. Okay, so as we've said, we've got a couple of reasons for changing the sensor size, and embiggening your sensor. I think that's a Simpsons word, is embiggening. I can't be sure about that. It may not even be a real word at all. But if you embiggen your sensor, you will typically get more background blur, less depth of field. It doesn't quite work as simply as that, because changing the sensor size doesn't change the depth of field of an image at all. As you might notice, if you switch a camera from Super 35 mode to full frame mode, like you can on the FX9, when you do that, the image itself doesn't change. You're just using a different part of it. So if we go from Super 35 mode, sorry, I'm not in mirror mode, so my movements are all back to front here. So if we go from Super 35 to full frame, we don't actually change the depth of field until we change the focal length of the lens to regain that same angle of view. And changing the focal length of the lens is actually what gives us a reduced depth of field. But be that as it may, the general principle is, if you make the sensor bigger, you're typically going to end up with a shallower depth of field. So why do people want that? Well, they want a cinematic look. They want it to look more like a film camera. And that works extremely well. It does look more like a film camera. And if you use it in Super 35 mode, the FX9 will give you a very similar look to Super 35mm film in terms of its depth of field. It's just physics. It doesn't matter that it's an electronic camera rather than a film camera. The optics and the physics tell you that the depth of field will be very similar. So you can put your background out of focus, and you can eliminate that distracting background and move people's attention from one part of the scene to the other by doing careful focus pulls from foreground to background and direct people's attention within the scene. And that's a great thing. And a lot of people would very much like to do that. Just a word of caution here, though. I've been involved in talking to a number of soap operas about this kind of thing, where they would very much like to do this kind of thing, where you change the style of production. But it does mean that things may slow down a little. You may have to change lenses in order to get the reach of lenses that you need, the range of zoom that you need. And also you might miss focus occasionally. Unless you've got a really good first AC focus puller on your production, then now and again you're going to miss focus and going to have to reshoot, and it's going to take a little bit longer. And as soon as you mention it's going to take a little bit longer, then some of the productions that are on a very tight budget and have to shoot so many pages of script per day will sort of take a little step backward and say, "Ooh, not sure about that." But then the payoff, of course, is you do get this cinematic look, this different look to the pictures that people really like. So it swings and roundabouts. By moving to large sensors, you get a lovely look to the pictures, but there may be practical reasons why it will slow you down a little. And if I take myself out the way here, I've just put together a few facts and figures about typical zoom ranges here. And on a 2/3 inch camera, you would typically have on a handheld lens 18 times, 22 times, no problem at all. Straightforward, standard Fuji or Canon sort of lens technology. Right the way up to a 100 times lens for a big box lens on sport. So you've got a massive range of zoom there. If we go to a full frame camera like the FX9, then it comes with a kit lens, which is, although it has some quirks like this kit lens, the 28-135 that comes with the FX9, it is a bit odd in some ways, but it does give you a very good zoom range. Although in full frame terms, very good is only 5 times compared to an 18 times or a 22 times or indeed 100 times on your 2/3 inch. So dramatically less zoom range on there. And that's a pretty decent sort of general purpose full frame zoom lens there. If you put a Canon CN20 on the front there, that's only Super 35. It's not even full frame on there. The CN20 is the massive lens that is used typically for wildlife production. That's a bit of a monster lens, and that will only go up to 20 times. If we look at the BRC-X1000, the PTZ camera I'm using at the moment, because that's a 1-inch camera, that doesn't have quite the zoom range of the smaller format cameras. They would typically have a 30 times or 40 times zoom on the lens. The figure in brackets uses the clear image zoom, the digital enhancement sort of thing, the digital zoom, which is actually very good indeed. So without the clear image zoom, we've got a 12 times lens on the BRC-X1000, which isn't a massive range of technology there, zoom lens. So if you want as a big go to PTZ cameras though, PTZ, not PTX, sorry, they need to be fairly small and light, and there's no way you could put a box lens onto a PTZ system. The motors wouldn't be big enough, it'd be ridiculous. So you tend to move towards smaller sensors. And as I say, the 1-inch is a bit of an anomaly in the PTZ world because it's a relatively large sensor, but you pay for it on a modest zoom range rather than big zoom range on the X400. So here's a couple of cameras with large sensors built into the front of the camera. The top one is a Venice camera, and that's got the Canon CN20 on, which is the de facto standard zoom lens for wildlife. I haven't set this photo up really very well, have I? Because I've still got the doors closed on the matte box there, so you won't see very much through that lens. But you can see it's a bit of a monster, and that's only a Super 35 lens rather than a full frame lens. So it's not even covering the full frame sensor of the Venice camera. Similarly, we've put an Optimo, an Angino lens on this camera here, and this camera is something called the F5500, which is a brand new shiny camera, and looks exactly like the HTC 3500, the standard OB cameras that I showed you before, but has actually got a Super 35 image sensor in the front end. But you can see that needs a lot of zoom motor control and so on. You could actually just put a Fujinon Cabrio lens on the front, or a CN7 or the new CN10 from Canon, and then you wouldn't need any of the motors. It would just plug and play sort of thing. But this Optimo is a manual lens, and therefore needs the iris, zoom, and focus motors built into it, all controlled via an Aladdin controller from Croziel. So you can see the different sort of rig that you would need there for live production on these cameras if you want to put a big zoom on the camera. As I say, you can put Super 35 or full frame camera lenses on the front of a large sensor camera, but then of course as soon as somebody makes a full frame camera, people want you to be able to put B4 lenses on it, which are only 2/3 inch. And there was a bit of a commotion when the FX9 first came out, because in order to work with a B4 lens, which projects a fairly small image circle, you need to crop the sensor to a sort of typically an HD or Super 16 sort of readout mode. And that wasn't available when the FX9 came out. Well, it is now. Typically, all the commotion's died down a bit now, and people aren't quite as desperate to see the image crop mode as they were when it first came out. But it's still a very useful feature, and means that you can actually put a B4 mount lens onto the front of the FX9. There's a lens adapter that allows you to do that, called the LA-EB1 lens adapter E format to B format, and that then allows you to put a B4 lens on the front of your FX9. You get all the zoom range you need, but you lose that cinematic look. You're no longer using the full frame sensor. You're now using a Super 16 cutout from it, and therefore you're not getting the shallow depth of field look that you were after in the first place. So it's kind of defeating the whole object of the exercise, but it does mean that you've got that flexibility of being able to go back to a B4 mount lens on the FX9, and you can switch to the Super 16 mode on the camera. I'll just show you what happens when you do that, actually, as we're passing. If I go to the output of my FX9 here, hopefully you can see that it's in full frame 6K mode. If you look towards the top right hand corner, just in mirror mode there, it says full frame 6K. If I press an assignable button on the camera with a bit of luck, I can put it into full frame 5K crop mode, which is a small crop that allows you to get 50p at nearly full frame. I can press it again, it goes to Super 35 mode, and I can press it again and it goes to Super 16 mode. That's one of the new features of the version 3 software on the FX9, and it makes it ever so easy to switch quickly from full frame to Super 35 to Super 16. And if you switch to Super 16, you can then put on that lens adapter and use it with a B4 mount lens, if you wish. Question here from David. David, who would like to use some PTZ cameras on set and control them with RCP 1500s alongside HTC 2400s. Yes, there is. There are two ways of doing that. I'll come back to that, if you don't mind, David, a little bit later on, when we talk a little bit more about the control protocols on PTZ cameras. So I'll try not to forget you. I'll come back to that. Right. Lenses FX9 and version 3. So yes, we've now got these different scan modes for the image sensor readout, going from full frame to 5K to Super 35 to Super 16 mode. And you can switch very quickly, and you can put that on an assignable button, as we just saw, to just click through the various modes. And that's quite useful because, as I was saying, in full frame mode, you can easily run out of range on your zoom lens. But if you quickly go from full frame to Super 35, you immediately get a 1.5 times zoom on your camera. So you multiply your focal length by 1.5. So that's quite a handy tool to have as a sort of just kind of a range extender. If you go a step further and take it down to Super 16, obviously you're now running out of pixels. So you're only able to develop an HD image rather than a 4K image, because you haven't got enough pixels to generate a 4K image. But at Super 35, you're still in 4K. In full frame, you're in actually coming down from 6K and super sampling down to 4K. So you've got quite a bit of flexibility. It's the kind of flexibility that you would have in post-production if you shot something in UHD and maybe wanted to deliver in HD. You would have that ability to crop and zoom electronically in post and reframe if you wanted to. So it's a similar kind of concept, but done live in camera. I just wanted to give you a feel for what kind of difference you will get when you move to full frame sensors. So I did a little diagram to show you the difference in depth of field between 2/3 inch and full frame. And there are a couple of factors that affect the depth of field. As we've said, the image sensor size, although actually it's your focal length that determines it really. And the other important one is the aperture that you're operating at. And in theory, you could get exactly the same depth of field on a 2/3 inch camera as you can on a full frame camera. But you would have to open it up 4 stops. There would have to be a 4-stop difference in the lens aperture between the full frame camera and the 2/3 inch. So if you're at f2 on your 2/3 inch camera, then you would have to be at f8 on your full frame camera. So you wouldn't be getting a desperately shallow depth of field on your full frame camera, but at least it would match the 2/3 inch camera. So there is an important point here about matching cameras, that if you do go towards a full frame and mix it with 2/3 inch cameras, then you need to think a little bit about whether you will notice the difference in depth of field. I don't think you would really if you were working in kind of a mixed economy, if you like. So if you had a few 2/3 inch cameras at the back of the stadium with big box lenses on, right at the long focal length of the zoom, and you had a couple of full frame cameras running around or on a track in front of the stage or something like that, giving you the sort of more cinematic beauty shots of and so on. I don't think that would be a problem at all. But if you had 2/3 inch cameras on stage running around right next to your full frame cameras, then as you cut from one to the other, you might notice, well, I hope you would notice a little bit of a difference in the look of the cameras. And I just wanted to try and put it into context, the difference between the formats. So going from 2/3 inch to 4/3 inch, you're doubling the height, but you're also doubling the width as well. So you end up with a 2 stops difference. Going from 4/3 inch to full frame, which is twice the size again, and also twice the height. So that's another 2 stops. So, and the difference between Super 35 and full frame is not dramatic. So if you were mixing, which is more likely, a bit of full frame camera technology with some Super 35 technology at an event, then you would want to open up a little by sort of 1 1/3 stops on the Super 35 camera to keep it sort of more like the full frame camera. So we've got a whole load of range of cameras from Sony. Other manufacturers are available, but I wouldn't if I were you, really, honestly. No. The HTC range is the top end of the range, and as we see, that will be typically on OBs, or Coronation Street at the moment is all HTC 3500s. There's a load of them on EastEnders and Sport OBs and so on. FB80 is a lower cost sort of camera, and still 2/3 inch. The HTC range is reassuringly expensive, to borrow another manufacturer's tagline. And the FB80 though is kind of an entry level 2/3 inch camera. So if you did want to mix and match some of each sort of thing, then the FB80 will be a good entry point. And you're talking about £20,000 for a full system, as we can see here, including the lens. Which is, I know that sounds a lot of money, but from a traditional HTC range of cameras, or building a high-end OB truck, it's really not. So I'd urge you all to go out and buy some of these. I think Visual Impact will be your first point of call rather. And they'll sell you some, and may even give you a discount. You never know. So the FB80 is a good, solid, straightforward 2/3 inch reliable camera that works with standard RCPs and viewfinders, 12G output. It can up-res to 4K, and it's a really nice little straightforward entry-level 2/3 inch. This is kind of the opposite. This is a new camera that's only just been released in Europe, and it looks exactly like an HTC camera, but it's got a large format sensor at the front end. It's a Super 35 sensor. So it's a little bit like the F5 or F55, if people remember that, but a newer development of that sensor technology. Global shutter, shallow depth of field, really low noise. And basically it's plug and play. You stick one of these fiber connectors in the back, and a Canon CN7 on the front, or a Fuji Cabrio, and you're good to go. Straightforward. But it is a little bit on the expensive side. But again, Visual Impact will give you some astounding discount if you want to buy one. You buy 4, you get 1 free, I think, or something like that. But I want to come back to how to integrate these cameras into the OB world. And there are certain things that we have to get to and from the camera, if you like. Power, pictures, and control are the core things that need to be connected up to your camera. And they all need to come back to some kind of technical area, or OB truck, or studio technicals area, or central apparatus area. And ideally, you would like a single cable to carry all of this stuff to connect your camera into your live production environment. If we just for a minute have a look at a typical camera control unit, still to this day, you use the same principle. You have a CCU, a camera control unit, stacked it up in an OB truck, and a single cable. It used to be triax copper cable, as it's now fiber optic SMPTE cables, that carry lots of different signals: power, program video, program sound, genlock, return, prompt, control, tally, intercom, all go up a single cable. So that when you're rigging your camera, bish bash bosh, plug the cable in and you're ready to go. There's no spaghetti involved. And we need to try and emulate that with our FX9 or Venice or whatever camera we choose to go with. So we need power. So and long cable runs are a challenge for low voltage power. So it could do with being a fairly sophisticated powering system. And long cable runs are the problem here. Typically at a venue, at a concert hall or a sports stadium, you might be 100 meters, 200 meters. On the golf, you might be 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers. So long cable runs are absolutely core to the idea of integrating your cameras into this world. And that means fiber, basically. And because fiber is great at carrying data over long distances, that's a great solution. But it's not great for carrying power. You need a piece of copper wire to do that. If you try and send power down glass, it kind of doesn't work terribly well. And you would typically want a cable like Exhibit A here, which is a SMPTE fiber cable. I just need to change focus on this from auto to manual. There we go. Oh, good example there. You can see how I can chuck my background slightly out of focus there by on this 1-inch camera. I can focus on the foreground and get me out of focus. And this has several cores down it, this SMPTE fiber cable. And that is the standard option for live broadcast production. And that will also carry your pictures and your control data and shading and iris and comms and tally. And it will get you a very long way as well. SMPTE fiber, typically around 2 to 3 kilometers with power. If you don't need the power, you can go up to 10 kilometers if you feel like it. A 3G copper cable with SDI on it, maybe 100 meters. A 12G cable with SDI on it, a copper cable, 30 meters. NDI, the new sort of IP-based sort of compressed format, typically 100 meters over Cat5. But for long distances, we're really going to be talking SMPTE fiber cables. And if you want to integrate a Venice camera or an FX9 into this kind of world, you will typically need some kind of fiber adapter that basically does this. It has a box at one end, a fiber cable, and an adapter that clips onto the back of the camera at the other end that breaks out into lots of different connections. It's a bit like a stage box in the audio world where you can break out lots of different audio connections from a snake sort of thing. But your snake in this particular case is a SMPTE fiber cable, one connector, bosh, into that, and then you're all connected up. And the way it works is you have a SMPTE fiber cable, a fiber CCU, and this breaks out lots of connections for video control, power, genlock, the main video itself, all break out of this fiber adapter box. So you do end up with a little bit of spaghetti up at this end, but not along the main length of the transmission format. That's just a single standard SMPTE fiber, which will carry everything, power and all the comms and data and so on. So typically you'll be looking at putting one of these fiber adapters onto the back of an FX9 or a Venice or something of that nature. And there are two manufacturers who kind of lead the race. My apologies to if there's another manufacturer I've missed, do get in touch and tell me what you're making and whatever. But Erica, who are a French company, make the Cam Racer, and Multidyne, who are an American company, make Silverback. And here's a Silverback system, here's a Cam Racer system. And basically they're very similar kind of products. You bolt it onto the back of your camera and do a bit of linking up of cables, and then you've got a single cable connection to your camera out at the other end of the stadium or the football field or whatever. So it does mean that you need an extra box in the configuration. I'll just move me out of the way so you can see this control panel. So that's the connection side of things. The control side of things is also really important. And if you look inside any studio or OB, in the vision control area, you will find a whole load of these RCP 1500s, a fine product. And there's a new product now called the RCP 3500, which is pretty much identical, thank the Lord, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's just got a couple of extra buttons on it, and that's it, really. Some extra nice features, but nothing too exciting. So it's a standard replacement for it. But you'll see a whole load of these. And strangely enough, rather than having one control panel and controlling many cameras with it, you'll just have one control panel per camera, because you need to be able to access the control on this thing immediately. And if you've got a football match with one half the stadium in bright sunlight and the other half in deep shadow, when you're watching the pictures, you can sense the vision engineers panicking as the ball goes from one end to the other, and 5 cameras need to be all re-irised at once. So you need to be able to grab the joystick on all the cameras and whack it to the other end of the range to expose your cameras correctly. You can't be selecting your camera, adjusting it, selecting another one, adjusting it. You need to have instant access straight away. And this is the default industry standard control panel. And in order to integrate your FX9 into this world, you need it to be able to talk to the RCP from Sony. And that's what we have with version 3 of the FX9 software. You can now get access to a RJ45 connector on the back of the camera, on the back of the XDCA adapter on the camera, that will transfer that protocol called S700 protocol over the network. And you can then get control of your camera. I have to say that my friend Alistair has made a rather splendid, that I'm quite jealous of, because it's really well done, a little video here on how to set up the S700 protocol control on the FX9. So I won't go into the full detail of which buttons you press and which numbers you enter into which panel setting and so on. But basically, this video will give you a really simple step-by-step in typical Alistair style of how to do it. And it's well worth a visit. But just to summarize it, all the RCPs, all the cameras are all connected to the same network switch, which allows them all to talk across a network. And it's a fairly straightforward system. An IP engineer would find it simplicity itself. Someone like me, from an old school clinging onto a BNC cable for the rest of my life, it's all wizardry and I don't know. And as soon as anything gets an IP address, I get a bit edgy. But it works a treat. And it works like this. You take your FX9, you put something called the XDCA FX9 extension unit on the back of it, and you've then got an RJ45 cable that connects to a PoE switch. The power over Ethernet powers the RCP, and your system all comes together, and you can control, you can rack your camera from your RCP, and everything works splendidly, we hope. It gets a little bit more complicated because we're not generally just doing a direct connection like this. Typically, as I mentioned before, because of the connection issues, we would want to do something more like this. And we've got a SMPTE cable here running 300 meters to the other end of the stadium. And that gives us a network connection on the CCU and a network connection on the adapter here that has to be linked through into the XDCA so that the network connection goes through the XDCA, through that link, into the fiber adapter, down the SMPTE fiber, through the network, through a network switch, and into the RCP. And that's how it works. So you've got sort of an extra box in the system here, sort of thing. But it all works reasonably well. Well, I say reasonably well, it just works perfectly, actually. I can hopefully, we can then add a load more RCPs into the system to control a BRC camera, as David was asking about before. So we can connect to a BRC-X1000. We can connect to a standard HDC camera. We can connect to an FX9. And the general idea here is that to the vision engineer, all the cameras look the same. They're just RCP 1500s or RCP 3500s. They all just look like this control panel, and he or she just opens and controls the iris and paints the colorimetry and so on. And it doesn't matter to the vision engineer that the cameras at the other end are actually different. And that is kind of key to the whole concept, to make it an easy integration into the existing OB or studio world. Let's have a look at the system, shall we then? I'll just show you again what I've got on my camera here. So I've got an FX9, obviously, with XDCA, and just out the back there is an Ethernet cable coming out the back. I hope you can see, and that's going out to something called I've actually got a different control panel, one that can control multiple cameras, because I haven't got multiple RCPs. I haven't even got any, actually, because it's all gone out on another job, unfortunately, which is really annoying. But I've got something called the MSU 1500 here, which I think is on this preset. Presets on PTZ cameras, the best thing in the world. Oh my goodness, you can see the dust and dirt on that screen there. I'm ashamed. I'm sorry, everybody. I can apologize for that. That's the control panel, and I can control the camera here from this control panel. If I go back to, so if you can see me changing the master black level control on this master setup panel, the RCP equivalent, if you like, you can see hopefully the black level going up and down, or I can change the iris control here and drive the iris on the camera, or I can go to various other controllable items on the camera. For instance, if I go to the detail correction, I don't know whether you can see, if I turn the detail correction, it probably doesn't come through on the Zoom link, but now my the front cover of that cinematographer magazine looks extremely edgy and over sharpened now, as I've got way too much detail correction. I can turn it the other way and it will go nice and soft as I reduce the detail correction. So we've got quite a number of controls here. If I go to something straightforward like white balance, I can paint the, whoa, get carried away there. I can paint the white balance and so on. So hopefully you can see that you can just treat this FX9 camera now as just another camera next to your HDCs or PTZs or whatever, and it integrates into that system quite nicely. Doesn't have all the controls. If I go back to me, if I go back to there, here's a list of the range of controls that you've got. You've got auto iris, black, white. The basics are all there. It's a bit like how you used to be able to control the camcorder via the RCPs, if anyone's that old, where traditionally you could integrate, I don't know, a DSR camcorder into this kind of system. And you've got red and blue versus green, but not RGB controls. You've got a lot of control of detail, you've got multi-matrix control, all sorts of fancy stuff. So as an example, if I go back to the camera, I can go to matrix, and I think I've switched on multi-matrix. So I've done the Spielberg film about the girl in the red coat walking through the ruins of Warsaw, wasn't it? Schindler's List. So I can pick out an individual color using the hue and the saturation. So I could pick another phase of the control and choose a different color. And I've got a huge range of color control via the multi-matrix. As an example, you wouldn't normally do something as severe as that with the multi-matrix, but it's a really useful tool for matching cameras so that you can get your colorimetry of your FX9 to match your HDC cameras, your mainline cameras. Okay. Just another quick question. What's the highest frame rate you can use with this system with fiber optic adapter? Yes, you're not going to be able to get high frame rate out of the camera system in a live environment. There is no multi phase output from the FX9. If you look at a supermotion camera in an OB truck, typically it will have three or four separate phases, A, B, C, D, that all go into the EVS for recording for the slow-mo, or better still, the Sony slow-mo server that nobody ever buys, but is really good. Yeah, but you don't have that facility with the FX9, I'm afraid, Sarah. It's normal speed only, if you like. Delays on tallies and returns, no delay on the tally because it's fiber optic and it's instantaneous. And I'm not sure what the delay on the return is, to be honest. I'll try and find a figure for that for you later. So that's the list of control functions that you've got, including tally control, which you have to feed into the RCP. The 9-pin D connector on the RCP allows that to feed through. I've also got remote setup of the camera via a web interface, and I've got this exact same web interface running on another laptop over here, so I can also get control of, for instance, zoom. So if I go back to my camera and go to my web interface on my laptop that's running just over here, I can control zoom or ND and so on, and I've got a whole range of extra control that is available to me via a web GUI as well, which is quite nice. And that web GUI is there if you're not using an RCP as well. You can just use the XDCA to put a wired connection into your FX9, and you can get network control of your camera just by browsing basically to the IP address of the camera. And lots of equipment these days, of course, has that web GUI sort of interface, including the FX9. So I can control focus, zoom, and iris, assuming you have a motorized lens. It'd be a good trick if you could do it with a manual lens. Just a quick reminder on the version 3 new features and so on. You've now got object tracking as well. So as well as tracking on just a face in the original autofocus or eye detection in the later version, we've now got object tracking on the autofocus. So I can just tap the screen somewhere randomly with my finger there. Oh, that wasn't a very good tap. I'll try that. That's a better one. So I can now lock on to any particular object, whatever its shape and size may be. And then I can use an assignable button to switch back to the eye detect autofocus. So as well as eye tracking and priority settings of who is your preferred person, facial recognition and so on, we've now got this object tracking on the focus. So I can very quickly move from foreground to background without any bother. It's very quick to do that indeed. Conscious I'm overrunning a little bit on time here, so I'll scoot along a little bit. That's a quick summary of the extra additional features of version 3, but these are all available on the Sony website to give you a full list of all the extra bits and bobs. I just wanted to come back to the BRCs, the BRC H900, X1000, H800, which is basically a goggle box camera, and has done tremendous work on that sort of show. The H900 and more recently the X1000 is a 4K sensor camera. I know there's a lot of PTZ cameras out there, and a lot of them are cheaper than the Sony ones, but the Sony emphasis has been pretty much on the image quality, and the X1000 is a really nice camera with that 1-inch sensor. And I just want to come back to David's point that there is RCP control either via the MSU that I'm using at the moment or via the RCP of the BRC range of cameras. So you can integrate these into the existing setup, if you like. Just a word of caution: the H900 camera requires a little adapter box to translate the instructions, because it was a bit earlier than the other cameras and didn't understand the S700 protocol. So all the BRC cameras basically can be integrated into the system. I'll scoot along. I just want to mention there's a couple of little box cameras, SRG P1 and B25, that are part of the SRG range from Sony, that might be of interest as locked off cameras in this kind of environment. NDI capable as well, which Sony have belatedly started using and is on the X400 camera as well. Finally, I just wanted to just quickly mention what happens if you mix cameras. What are the challenges? There are fundamental differences. I've covered the sensor size and how your depth of field will look a little bit different. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any point doing it on large sensor cameras. There's also a fundamental difference between single sensor Bayer filter cameras that use an on-sensor chroma filter to separate the RGB out, versus the more traditional 3-sensor prism block with dichroic filters. Fundamentally, they will differ in their colorimetry, and you'll never get a perfect match between the two. Well, you might, but it's very hard to do. One way of getting closer to being able to do it is to buy both cameras from the same manufacturer. I'd recommend the Sony Corporation as your preferred supplier of cameras. And of course, Visual Impact as your preferred dealer as well. So getting them from the same manufacturer helps, but there will always be a little bit of difference between a 3-chip and a single chip camera. But then in terms of matching, your vision engineer will want to go straight to certain things to make sure that the cameras have the same gamma curve, that they're both using the same matrix. So for instance, you might have to default to ITU 709 for gamma and matrix, rather than use something a little bit sexier in the FX9, like the S-Cinetone, because the rest of your cameras in a system probably won't have the S-Cinetone matrix or gamma curve. So in order to match everything, you might have to go back a little step and go back to ITU 709 to make sure that everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. But once you've got the same 709 matrix and gamma, the rest of it is all done via the RCP, black levels, white levels, and the RCP capability will enable that, and the matrix that we've seen before. So once you've chosen the gamma curve and the matrix, the rest of it you can do via the remote control panel. So hopefully you can see that there is a way to integrate lots of different flavors of cameras into a live production environment, and they'll all hopefully work happily together, we hope. I'll call it a draw there, and if there are any more questions, do send them on to Rob, or Rob. I don't know whether there's anything else that you any other questions that I missed or anything, but
Yeah, we've just got one from David that on the PTZ cameras that you started to go through.
Oh yes, yeah, yes. There, that's quite a complicated question actually. Do you mind perhaps if David sends me an email or sends you an email, and I'll get back to him. But yes, you can control them with the same protocol. There is RCP control of the PTZ cameras, but they would have to be the BRC range of cameras. And as I said, the important thing is to choose the gamma curve and the matrix. But if David wants to give me a call, that will be absolutely fine, and we'll have a bit of a chat about it.
Okay, David, if you send it to rob@visuals.co.uk, and then I can pass it on to Neil.
Okay, how are we doing otherwise? We all okay?
Just one that Hugh has just posted. Am I all right in thinking that the sensor size and the resolution are not directly related?
That's correct, yes. You can put 4K pixels onto a 2/3 inch sensor. You have to squeeze them a bit tighter, squash them up a little bit more, and it's more of a challenge. But absolutely, you're right. There is no direct relationship between sensor size and resolution. It's harder to do more pixels in a smaller area. But actually, with a 2/3 inch chip, you've actually got 3 sensors typically. So you've got 4K resolution in red and green and blue channels. So they work in a slightly different way. So it's not quite as simple as 2/3 inch versus 1/8 inch. It's a bit more complicated than that sort of thing. But yeah, you're right. There is no direct relationship.
Okay, I think that's it in terms of the questions. And before everyone leaves, I just want to thank Neil very much for his time and his expertise, particularly the All Our Yesterdays intro. I thought that was quite good.
Yes.
So thanks for that, Neil. As always, fantastic. And obviously, thank you to everyone that joined. I hope you enjoyed it, and bye for now.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thanks, everybody.